I have had a very checkered career in fashion and business, bouncing back and forth from the corporate world to the art world. And a lot of it was financial. I think everybody can appreciate that. It's very difficult to make a living as an artist. And circumstances would arise, jobs would present themselves, and I would go from an art job to the corporate world. For years, I was head of internal audit for a large corporation situated in Atlanta. And when they sold to a Canadian firm, I moved back to Chicago, and it was then that I got my first studio. For once, I could drag my artwork out of my home, I could get away from it, and I wasn't doing it 24 hours a day, which you do need a breather. And it also allowed me to do bigger projects that I could never do out in an apartment. And I'm now in my 19th year in a studio. My first studio, I had to move because they sold the building. But I was getting older and my jobs were getting smaller, the scale anyways. And over the past probably 8 to 10 years, my focus has been millinery. Many, many years ago, I had a millinery salon, and times changed, hats died off, and I continued only with private clients and the theater. So when I moved back to Chicago, some people found me that were into millinery, and it took off again, this time 90 miles an hour. Basically, it was the Parkways Foundation that really brought me back into the millinery business. Every year, they would have a very large garden party with anywhere from 500 to 700 people attending, and almost all of them, men and women, would wear hats. And every year, the competition would get a little stiffer and a little stiffer until it was quite an event. Unfortunately, I believe it was last year, they had to discontinue this because Parkways was no longer being funded by the city. So again, we're peaks and valleys all the way through. So I'm going to show you an overview of the work that I have done. This goes back to the 70s. And the focus is mostly on millinery and on gloves. But I have hit some of the highlights of what I have created over the years in other areas. For many years, I worked doing three-dimensional art for the movies, for advertising, and for videos. And with the advent of computer-generated imaging, a lot of that went by the wayside. So we're back again into hats and gloves, and on a little more personal level. So let's start and see. And these are early pieces. These were made in the 70s. They were some of the first commercially viable hats that I made. And as you can see, they are old, black and white. You know, they barely had color. The one on the left is a close friend of mine, and the photograph was taken by her brother, and he ultimately won a national award for that particular photograph. Now, these are mostly hats that were made for the ladies for the Parkways Foundation function. And the two at the top were kind of a surprise. I thought at the time they were rather extreme, and I did not have hopes of them selling, but they did. And it was encouraging because I think women are taking chances. They're expanding their horizons, and they're willing to wear a little more extreme fashion. So that was encouraging when I saw those two sell as quickly as they did. I try to create a variety of hats because I have a variety of clients. All walks of life, all financial situations, and all different phases of fashion. The yellow and black hat was made to go with an Hermès dress that my client had brought then the pattern on the dress was exactly the same as the hat. The one on the left at the bottom was for a client to wear on a cruise, and when she sent me the photograph of her wearing it on the cruise, it looked like she had stepped out of a Ginger Rogers movie. I couldn't believe how beautiful. Her dress had a train on it. It was just a product of another era. The flowers, I found it very difficult over the years to buy beautiful millinery supplies. It's a dying art. During the Kennedy era, there were over 600 millinery supply, or before the Kennedy era, there were over 600 millinery supply houses in New York alone. At the end of the Kennedy administration, there were less than 50. It was a sad commentary that we lost so much in the line of art and in crafts. The people who made the beautiful flowers and trims are all gone, and there's very few sources left, and those that are left are mediocre at best. But it forced me to start learning new techniques, and these are all flowers and trims that I make myself. I would say 99% of what I use on my hats I make from raw silk. The Empress Eugenie riding hat became very popular with the advent of, now I'm going to lose it. It was a recent TV series. I know you'd remember it. It had to do with, no, prior to that, it was a Western type. Oh, I don't feel so bad. No one else knows what it is either. But there was a big demand for ladies riding hats, and it kind of moved its way from that into steampunk. It was like the forerunner of the steampunk look. And so I found myself making tons and tons of these riding hats. This hat, I have a wonderful client with a wonderful sense of humor, and she just doesn't like high fashion hats. And so she brought an Emilio Pucci coat that she was going to wear, and she needed a hat to go with it. Well, it's all geometrics, and I thought, what do you do? How do you complement something so convoluted and busy? So I just took the elements of the coat and I created this hat. And she wore this to the New York Conservancy Party, which is another big hat party in New York. Thousands of ladies attend this, and if you talk about stiff competition, that's the place. But she was really the hit of the parade. She wound up in Bill Cunningham's column, and if you're familiar with Bill Cunningham, that's quite a feather in her cap. And she hit just about every publication in New York at that time. Needless to say, she was very happy with my work. This hat is a silk fan, not an actual fan, but a fan-shaped hat made out of Dupioni silk. The underside of the hat is lined in that periwinkle blue, and the flowers were all made by hand. I have employed old classic techniques. I was telling the students in the class this morning, I have the advantage of age. I was around when all those beautiful hats were made and worn in the 50s. And I saw how they were constructed. And over the years, millinery changed so much that these techniques were lost. But I remembered them, and I've been able to use them effectively. For example, you can see there's a little wire saddle that supports this very large hat and keeps it stable on Madam's head. And here I got one customer saw another hat I had made for another lady, and I don't usually duplicate hats, but I thought if she wants this, I will recreate it, modifying it, coupled with the fact that this was going to go to Florida. I figured there's over 1,000 miles between the two hats. It's a safe bet. I've learned my lesson the hard way when two of my hats of the same style wound up at the same function. It's embarrassing. Novelty millinery. I have a bevy of clients who just love novelty millinery, and it really is my strong point. I love a little humor in these hats. I don't try to make people look ridiculous. I try to put a little humor, a little wit into these hats. The poodle, the picture's not great, but it is a poodle. My client brought in a suit from Prada. It was a pink and gray and white Chanel type weave, little jacket and skirt combination with a print blouse that matched the lining of the jacket, which was bubblegum pink shantung with little black poodles all over it. When I saw it, I knew exactly what I had to do. And this was the first hat I made for her. And it has a little tail, you can't see it, with a pom-pom that bounces when you walk. And the hat has a back strap that's like a dog collar in pink with little pink rhinestones on it. Well, needless to say, she was a big hit and wound up in every publication after the event. And the other one, the little frog, for years I did work for the Learning Curve. I made patterns and prototypes of stuffed toys for toddlers and infants. And so I got a good background and a good vocabulary in making little animals. And that's how that one came about. This was kind of strange how this happened. One year, the zoo, Lincoln Park Zoo, has a really elaborate ball. It's the Chicago 1100, you know, big bucks. And they all wear designer gowns from Paris, lots of jewels, the whole 9 yards. And one year the theme was Moulin Rouge, and they based it on the movie Moulin Rouge. So a number of my clients came to me asking for gowns with corsets. So I made maybe 6 or 7 evening gowns that had a corseted bodice. And I really liked the look, and I came up with this idea for a hat. And it was only a sketch on my table when one of the ladies came in and saw it, and she said, "I want that hat." The last person I would think to wear it. But it was so successful that I had to make another one in pewter gray. And the hat on the left, this was also made for my poodle customer. And I sent her a picture on the internet, and I could tell she wasn't very happy with it from her phone conversation later. And so when she came to the studio, she stopped dead in the doorway and just started to laugh because she thought the hat was her hat. But actually, the hat box is the hat. It's a little tiny miniature hat, and the cord on the hat box is a back strap. So it changed the whole venue. And the other one on the other side was for a function at, I believe it was at Saks. It was Brian Atwood was having a trunk show. And the lady that ordered this was a close personal friend of his mother and knew him as a child growing up. So she wanted to do something to kind of honor him. And so I made the little shoebox hat and put her business card on the lid of the shoeboxes to give her a little cachet. These were made for a friend of mine and a client in Florida who does gourmet cooking demonstrations. And so that's how the little cooking hat came about. There's a little cookbook on top that it's the Best of Betsy cookbook, you know, honoring her, and a variety of kitchen implements, but they're all fake, even the butcher knife, which does look pretty real. And the one on the right was made for a press release party. The poodle lady asked for that one. Again, you can see she doesn't like your traditional hats, so I came up with that one for her. And Betsy attends a lot of art gallery openings, and asked to make something that she could wear to that and to Art Basel. So I came up with the palette hat for her, as well as the Halloween hat. She asks for extra jewels and glues them on her face when she wears the hat. She's really into millinery. In fact, she never leaves the house without a hat. It's always something extravagant. I really have to hand it to her. She's a marvelous person. And this goes back to her gourmet cooking demonstrations. All the vegetables are made from silk, and the fish is a metallic fabric with a mesh overlay. The capers are tiny jade beads, and there are little beads dangling from the salt shaker, and it's on a spring wire that when she would move would shake, and it looks like the salt was spilling. Yeah, the frying pan was made from some strange fabric I just happened to come across, and it looked for all the world just like cast iron. It looked like it weighed a ton. And this was also made for Betsy for another Art Basel event. And I made the Valentine candy box for her, and I reprinted this little Valentine, and you can date it immediately. What it says is, I don't want a Valentine, I want a Valentino. Oh. So I didn't want to part with it, so I reprinted it for her. And her birthday cake and the other Valentine hat for yet another client. This was made for the director of the restoration of Buckingham Fountain. That year, Tiffany coupled up with Parkways Foundation, and Tiffany's redid the garden in Buckingham, or in Grant Park, adjacent to the Buckingham Fountain, and Parkways financed the restoration of the fountain. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's one of the largest fountains in the United States. In fact, it might be the largest fountain. And it was built, I believe, in the 20s as a memorial to Clarence Buckingham. And it has suffered seriously over the years. So they restored the fountain, and she wanted a hat that would memorialize it. So I took the elements of the fountain, the water horses, the cattails, the water lilies, and other architectural elements, and worked it into her hat. That same year, my client, my poodle lady, took a large table, and she asked that I create hats for all the guests at her table, honoring Tiffany's for the $1.4 million they shelled out to build the gardens. And so this is one of the creations I made. They were all done in Tiffany blue. And that was her hat. And you can see there's a pearl egg, a gold egg, and a diamond egg. And yet another Art Basel hat. She does attend every year. And so this is the one that I created for her last year. And the hat on the right was for one of your locals who lives here. She was celebrating her 70th birthday, and she wanted a fantastic hat, and the party was held right around Christmas. So I tried to incorporate the Christmas colors and a few snowflakes, give her a little razzle-dazzle. Oops. This is for Betsy again, one of her extreme hats. And every year I'm asked to create Halloween hats, and these are 2 samples that I have done. And then we get into handbags. Most of what I do are structured handbags. I don't usually do like pouches or hobo bags or anything like that. And so this was done for one of the zoo balls the year they had a disco theme. And I thought, what better icon than the mirrored ball? And it's actually Mylar tiles that have been glued onto a papier-mâché ball. But the tricky part was there's an interior structure that allows the lid to go up and down and to prevent the purse from tipping. And it took me longer to figure out the logistics of that structure inside than it did to create the entire handbag. This is just a canvas purse, I should say. It's not a big bag, accordion type, and it looks like it would be fairly simple to construct, but this one I had to stand on my head and whistle Dixie to assemble. And we have a little Minaudière. The bottom half is black velvet, and the top is paperboard. And it's several layers of board that are cut in a filigree pattern and painted and gilded, and a handmade lampwork bead on the top. Years ago, the fashion editor of the Chicago Herald, which is no longer around, came into my hat salon, and she was toting a handbag that was just breathtaking. And it took me years to realize what it had been made from. It had been made from a Japanese obi, beautiful, beautiful fabric, but it was flat as a pancake. It was an envelope, but it had a very clever system of pleats in there that opened up so you could put any amount inside the handbag, but yet when you took them out, the bag went perfectly flat and was great for storage. So it took years to figure out how it was done, but I finally mastered it. The top one was a handbag I made for my sister for her wedding. And for a number of years now, I've been teaching handbag construction. And they're usually smaller handbags and always stiff structured variety. And this is a fairly good example of the types that I make. The bottom one on the right is a sage green double handbag. It's like two miniature handbags joined. And this was created for the Haute Couture Club. They've been very good to me, very generous in sponsoring me. And so when they asked if I would donate something for their auction, this is what I came up with, a sewing kit. And another one of my little Christmas handbags that looks like a package. And these are more recent. I've been making little clutch handbags, which are enjoying popularity these days. And the classes I teach, and I teach how to make things like this, they're all made from readily available materials that don't require special tools. And that's what my emphasis was when I came here. I wanted the students here to know you don't need elaborate equipment, you don't need expensive materials to create beautiful things. Most of it comes from here. Many years ago, I was so envious of a cousin who was a glass blower, but I knew I could never blow glass because you have to be connected with a studio or with a college of some sort or university that has the equipment, which runs into hundreds of thousands of dollars. But a friend of mine told me about lamp working, and I looked into it, took a class, and I was hooked. So these are some of the pieces that I made many years ago. The one on the right was made as an entry for an exhibit at the Toledo Art Museum. I was born and raised there, so I was eligible to enter my artwork into local area artists. And unfortunately, I don't think the judge realized these were not real teeth. They're all glass. But I did put some crystal ones in to indicate that it is glass, but I just have a feeling that got overlooked. And it goes in a candy box shaped, heart-shaped candy box presentation box, and it was entitled Love Me or Leave Me. And this was one of the last pieces I did. Unfortunately, I developed all kinds of problems with my hand and I had to stop working with glass, but my surgeon tells me that I can go back to it again, so that was really good news. Miscellaneous art. I was telling one of the students, I don't have a hat salon. I have an art studio that makes hats, but I also make gloves. I make this, I make that. And for a number of years, particularly when I was in school, I did a lot of graphic work. I don't do much of it anymore because a lot of my friends who had shops and needed graphics have all grown old like me and they've retired, and I'm kind of out of the loop. And with computer-generated art, I am a total dinosaur. So this has kind of gone by the wayside. Some sculptures that I've created. And this was one of the strangest commissions I got. They wanted a pair of masks for their wedding. I couldn't imagine why, and I never met them before, and it was all done through a close friend, so I never met the bride and groom. But when she sent me the picture, it kind of freaked me out because it looked so much like them. And the pieces on the sides are the molds that I made to create the masks. This one was another client wanted a pair of presentation goblets and something really unusual. So this is what I came up with. He supplied me with the goblets, and then I created glass embellishment. And the only thing I could do was to epoxy them on there. I was approached by some friends who are designers of hotel interiors, and they asked me to do a painting for the ballroom. This looks like a postage stamp, but it's actually 14 feet across, which filled my studio. And one of the designers kept coming to the studio and having a stroke. He'd look at the colors and, oh, it's just too bright, this isn't going to work. And I kept telling him, Fred, you're standing 4 feet from it. This is going into a ballroom the size of O'Hare Airport. And I was right. Once it was up on the wall, I mean, it is like a postage stamp. Now, for years, as I believe I told you, I made three-dimensional art for the movies and for advertising and videos. And these are some of the pieces that I made. Originally, I was commissioned to make a pair of ruby slippers for a New York shoe company. And when the ad aired in New York, an Oz memorabilia collector approached the shoe company, who put him in touch with the ad agency, who put him in touch with the photographer, who put him in touch with the art director, who called me and said, John, we need another pair of ruby slippers. So I wound up making 7 pair of these shoes. They each contain in excess of 4,000 hand-sewn sequins, and they're based largely on architectural drawings of the actual shoes and photographs that we could get. We did have some help in the studio. One of the girls working there recreated the label for us, and bless her heart, she misspelled Pasadena, which was on the label, which is good, because right now you can tell they're not original, but 100 years from now, who knows? They could be pawned off as forgeries, and you just try to avoid that, but it's pretty obvious these are a remake. And that was one of the presentation boxes for one of the pairs that I created. And That is a giant egg that was done for the Indianapolis Repertory Theater. They had, the opening play was Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, and it was underwritten by a very wealthy business, I can't remember now who, but they were doing it like Zakuski, which is a Russian dinner, and it was held prior to the opening of the season, and each table had one of these Fabergé-styled eggs. Inside was a hand holding a cone filled with gold-wrapped truffles and recreated 100-ruble notes that they could exchange for a glass of wine or champagne during intermission. And I can't tell you how many of those we made. And the mask was made for the soprano Patrice Michaels for an ad, Sarah Lee Supports the Arts, which fortunately ran for over 2 years, which was a real feather in my cap because ads don't usually run that long. And this was made for a corporate event for Indianapolis. It was called the Treasures of Indianapolis. And we made any number of mummy cases, mummies, Egyptian art, cats, obelisks. And when it was all over, the state chose pieces they wanted to keep, and they were going to toss the rest. So my partner in Indianapolis said, "Do you want this? I can't keep it in my studio." And I said, "Sure." So I grabbed whatever I could and threw in my car and drove it back to Chicago. And these were made for an exhibit, the exact nature of which evades me. I'm getting old and I don't remember, but it had something to do with shoes. And this was made for a Men in Black party. It's a really huge head. The eyes light up. And we found a tuxedo, a Halston tuxedo in a thrift store for $4, which was perfect with this. It has a body harness and it stands over 4 feet tall. And it weighs next to nothing. It was really a marvel because it's all paper mache. These are some of the boxes that I make. They're mostly paperboard, and the shoe is actually a little bonbon box. There's the handle here. This lifts off. And for years, I have sewn, and I really narrowed it down to basically I only do evening gowns because I'm generally left alone on what I do and what I design. And every year, a close friend takes his sister to the ball every year, and bless her heart, she lets me do whatever I want to do, and she never intervenes. And I had designed this like 3 years prior to the actual construction. Always wanted to do it, but I knew it would be a nightmare. And one year I had 2 student interns that were just wizards. And so I approached them and I said, "Do you want to attempt this?" I said, "This is going to be as close as you're going to get to haute couture. It's all going to be hand sewn," and it was. And they jumped on it. The original drawing was just done with magic marker and a Sharpie. So to recreate the brush or the strokes of the pen, we use wide French ribbon, which you can see the big black slashes across. And then they created miles of tubing to create the little Sharpie pencil line around it. And then I couldn't begin to tell you how complicated the center of the flower was. It's so many steps involved in those. But I think the results were really close to the drawing, which we really tried to maintain. And the yellow dress was designed but never constructed. The pink peignoir was for a 70th birthday party, jammies at the Ritz. And they invited me to the party. This was one of my clients. She wore that. And then the gentleman whose birthday it was, I created a Liberace type smoking jacket with black and silver lame patterned in a paisley pattern with big velvet collars. They look terrific, but I'm one of the few people I know that can say they crossed the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton in their pajamas. So it was quite an event. And this was the year of the Moulin Rouge. You can see what the style was all about at that time. In fact, this is the women's board from the Lincoln Park Zoo. And these are the gloves that I make. When I mention gloves, a lot of people don't understand. They're not just basic gloves for warmth. They're more or less gloves, wearable art. These are some of the earliest that I've made. These go back, I couldn't begin to tell you how old they are. This pair was featured in Threads magazine. And the little hat with the frog on I thought was so successful that I carried it over and made a pair of gloves. And rather than two frogs, I decided it needed something else and did a dragonfly. Are there any questions? Yes?
You have these amazing sculptures for the head. How do you keep the weight down so the person doesn't have a headache by the end of the evening?
Oh, the molds I made were basically carved from beadboard, which is PVC. It's an insulating product. And then, bless her heart, I had an assistant, Rosie, who figured out a technique of crumpling up aluminum foil, which allows you to mold it over any surface, which I molded over the actual mold and then paper mache'd over that. So when I took the mask off, it weighed virtually nothing because I used very lightweight but strong papers and a very rigid glue. So, and they were on handles. Yes?
Do you get to wear your own hats much?
Not often. The shoemaker's children go barefoot. Yes?
Do you still have your storefront, or is it mostly word of mouth now?
I have a studio, yes. And it basically is word of mouth. I have never had to advertise. And for most of my career, I did well. The last few years, the economy's been pretty sad. That it? Okay, well, thank you very much.